So I'm scrolling on Twitter this weekend, as one does, and I see a little tweet pop up, something like, Kolasinac and Mustafi have started a player mutiny at Schalke? But I don't know, it's 2021. Weird stuff is happening all the time, and also, it's Twitter. But that was probably the fourth strangest thing I saw on Twitter that day. So I keep on scrolling. Later in the day, I see another video of Mustafi yelling at all his teammates after they've conceded a goal, for which Mustafi had actually left his man wide open. Now, as an Arsenal fan, that was certainly nothing new, but I'm starting to connect some dots here. Then after Schalke's 5-1 loss to Stuttgart, I see that they've now fired their fourth manager of the season. And they also went ahead and fired their sporting director, the assistant manager, and the head of player fitness all at once. So finally, I'm thinking to myself, all right, you know what? I need to look a little deeper. I need to see what exactly is going on here. I knew Schalke were having a bad season, but I didn't know things were this bad. Come to find out, Schalke are having the single worst campaign in Bundesliga history, with just 1 win and 9 points from 23 games. And in their last 40 games, they've only scored 25 goals, while they've lost 26 games. So join me and keep watching if you want to hear more about the waking nightmare that has been Schalke's season, as told by the tenures of each Forsaken coach. Now, before we get into the video, guys, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. I do daily uploads of all types of soccer content. So just click around my channel and I'm sure you'll find something you like. And thank you to all the recent subs who've got me over 300. And finally, be sure to drop a like on the video before we even get started, because that's what we do on this channel. If you're new, that's the rules. Play along or get left behind. So the first coach that Schalke had this season was David Wagner. But his story starts a few years back. So let me rewind the clock. Wagner took over in 2019 after a period of success for Schalke that ended pretty badly. You might remember them losing 10-2 over 2 legs to Manchester City in the knockout stages of the Champions League. Yes, this team was in the Champions League 2 seasons ago. And in fact, it was Leroy Sané who contributed 5 goals plus assists in those 2 legs to sink his former club. So it was a particularly stinging moment. They fired their coach and brought in Wagner. And Schalke were coming into last season looking like a team that would compete for Champions League in the Bundesliga. In fact, they were only a few points off of it when the Bundesliga restarted, which funnily enough was one of my first videos on this channel. And I was even talking about how if they made a good run of things, they could slip into those Champions League spots. It feels like ages ago, but that was less than a year ago. Anyway, Wagner ended the season on a 16-game winless streak, and yet somehow he wasn't fired. Perhaps it was because there were bigger issues going on at the club, because this club was an absolute disaster when the pandemic hit and the season ended. First of all, they had just faced a terrible run of injuries, and that had contributed to a lot of the bad form. Also, the team was in massive debt. They had been in debt before due to some, poor management of funds from the top. But also, they decided to invest in a new $100 million training facility, which would be the second most expensive training facility in the world, right before the pandemic hit. So definitely a bad time to make an investment. And then shortly after the pandemic started, their main owner and bankroller, Clemens Tönnies, sorry for butchering his name if I did, he resigned from the club amid some very bad circumstances. He had to leave the club the previous season after some racist remarks that he made. And then he came back to the club and he doubled down on his racism by laying off a bunch of club staff when the pandemic started, which did not go well with the Schalke fans. And also, his company that had made him a billionaire was a big meat packing company in Germany, and in one of their factories they had a massive COVID outbreak, and he also faced a lot of blame for that. So amidst all of that, he resigns, and there's this massive debt. Their form is sinking, but yet Wagner somehow survived this entire mess and made it to the new season. So that's where we start. Anyway, that's also kind of where the story ends, because Wagner was sacked after his second game of the season. He lost the first game 8-0 to Bayern, an absolute hammering. And then they also lost 3-1 to Werder Bremen, and all of a sudden Wagner was jobless. The winless streak was now at 18 games, and Schalke were just in need of anything to stabilize the club. So they hired this guy named Manuel Baum. He was a former Germany youth coach. You know, there weren't a lot of great options out there, but they were thinking there could be something here with Baum. And his tenure was nothing short of calamitous. Schalke's terrible run continued. In his first 10 games, he was not able to get a single win, and the winless streak extended to 28 before he was eventually sacked. And in the span of the 10 games that he was in charge, his assistant manager, Naldo, who used to play for Schalke and he brought in as an assistant, basically got in a fight with one of the players, Bisevic, whose contract was then terminated. And this all happened in the same period, as well as Harit and Bentaleb both got suspended from the team by Baum for basically attitude issues or just being problems at the club. Now, again, as an Arsenal fan, there's a lot of parts of this story that I can relate to. So poor Harit sitting on the sidelines, definitely a little bit reminiscent of the whole Ozil and Guendouzi situations. And much like Ozil, Harit was one of the few players at Schalke, although inconsistent, who had the quality to actually get them out of such a terrible streak that they were on at the time. So the decision was very, very confusing and only led to more chaos within the camp. So the Manuel Baum experiment got ended early, and after 10 games he was sacked, with the winless streak sitting at 28 games, just 3 short of the record set by Tasmania Berlin, who are now a 5th division side. And actually, shout out to Stadio Podcast. I don't know if any of you guys listen to that. I'm sure plenty of you do. But the interesting story about Tasmania is that they actually hold the record kind of fondly because it was their only time in the Bundesliga, and they weren't even really supposed to be in the Bundesliga, but they just got put in because the Bundesliga wanted a team from Berlin. They got smoked by everybody. It was the only season they were in there. And they almost hold the record as kind of a relic of the club now that they are like a small lower league team in Berlin. It's the most terrible record to have, and even the holders of the record kind of wanted it. And yet Schalke were just failing so miserably that they were about to ruin all of that, and they were only 3 games away from capturing this horrible piece of history. Anyway, their third manager of the season comes in, Hoob Stevens, and you know, I won't spend too much time on him, but he used to manage Schalke back in the 90s. He was relatively successful for them, and he's just the caretaker. He's had to do it before, and you know, the way the season is going, he might have to do it again. So scraping the bottom of the Bundesliga table, and within just a stretch of chaotic games and drama off the field, terrible performances on it, who do Schalke turn to? Well, they hired Christian Gross, who was actually a retired coach at the time, who had had some success back in his day, but most recently was found coaching in Saudi Arabia and Egypt. He was a questionable hire for Schalke at best, but remarkably, coming into the game, which would have tied Tasmania Berlin's record at 31 winless, they actually get a 4-0 win over Hoffenheim, which you may remember well, highlighted by a hat-trick from the young American Matthew Hoppe. I don't know, I'm not totally sure how to say his name. Schalke just come with this performance out of nowhere, and ironically, Amine Harit, who was the guy who got suspended under Baum a few months prior, provided 3 assists in this game and scored at the end, which again just showed how ridiculous of a situation that was. But Schalke at least finally got the win. They avoided the record, and then very quickly they were back to the Schalke of this season. So Gross did manage to get a few draws here and there, but as I said, this is literally still the worst campaign in Bundesliga history. And for a club of Schalke's stature, which is massive, probably right behind Bayern in terms of biggest club in Germany, this was just not good enough. It was not acceptable, and the heat was only rising from the fans, from the players, on Gross, on the sporting director, on everybody involved. It was just an absolute festering wound at Schalke 04. In the January transfer window, they signed Kolasinac, they signed Mustafi, and they signed Klaas-Jan Huntelaar, a trio of aged warriors to be sure. And yeah, I would say fans were less than impressed with that. And in fact, there's a story that before the Dortmund game, which of course is the biggest derby for Schalke, probably the biggest derby in Germany, the fans showed up to the team hotel and actually pulled up and demanded answers from the staff and from the players. I read in an article that the fans came and they were shouting at the sporting director at the team hotel, basically insinuating that the groundsman was the one who did the medical instead of the medical staff, because Huntelaar missed pretty much every single game after they signed him. And I think still has only played like 10 minutes for Schalke since they signed. But yeah, to say the least, it was a mess. And then they went out and lost 4-0 to Dortmund. You'll probably remember the beautiful scissor kick goal from Haaland. You would think that that type of loss in the derby would have been the final nail in the coffin here for Christian Gross, but somehow he was still hanging on by a thread. And that's when the story comes out about the kind of player insurrection that was happening with Mustafi and Kolasinac and Huntelaar basically leading the charge. These guys who have just gotten here, which shows you just how much disarray there was, that these were the guys that were speaking for the team when they had only just gotten to the club, even though Kolasinac had been there before. But basically they said that this guy was completely outdated, his tactics were old, he couldn't even remember players' names, and he couldn't even remember the names of the teams that they were playing. One of the most damning accusations that came out of this story was that apparently there's a player named Can Bozdogan, I believe is how you say his name. Gross, the manager, called him Can Erdogan. Didn't even know his name, and that's the name he went with. I'm sure that there's a Mesut Ozil joke in here somewhere, but I don't know. I can't quite find it. Totally egregious from the manager. He didn't even know the players' names. He's just making it up as he went. And you know, considering he was a retired old man who'd been coaching in the Middle East, I mean, like, you kind of got what you asked for when you hired him. I don't know. Anyway, they went on to lose to Stuttgart 5-1, and as you will all surely know by now, Christian Gross has been sacked, and that is where things stand right now. Look, Schalke's fall from grace as a club has been far more widespread and far more insidious than I could even begin to touch on in this video. But I had to share this story because my interest was piqued at the weekend with that whole report of everything that went on, and it got me digging into this situation, and man, Schalke are just such a mess. And I have to say, it made me feel a little bit better about where Arsenal are at right now. I can't lie to you. But man, if you are a Schalke fan, all my thoughts and prayers are with you, because you are going through some of the most terrible things I could ever imagine as a fan. But yeah, now Schalke are looking for their 5th manager of the season. They look like they're destined to go down to the second Bundesliga and get relegated. But hey, at least their $100 million training facility is almost done. Anyway, that's gonna be all for this video, guys. Thank you for checking it out. As I said, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Drop a like on this video as well if you didn't already. And I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace.